New York. Under the towering glass panels of the United Nations headquarters, a familiar figure stepped once again into the global spotlight. US President Donald Trump returned to the General Assembly, and with him came a blend of bravado, mockery, and sharp criticism. His speech, billed as a chance to reaffirm America's vision for peace, quickly turned into a scathing rebuke of the very institution hosting him. From the opening moments, Trump framed himself as a lone negotiator who had taken on the world's conflicts without support from the UN. With his trademark mix of showmanship and blunt rhetoric, he declared that he had ended 7 wars, stressing that he personally dealt with leaders across the globe to secure peace. What he did not receive, he said with evident disdain, was any assistance from the United Nations. Not a phone call, not an offer to finalize agreements, nothing. Instead, Trump mocked, the only things he got from the UN were a broken escalator and a malfunctioning teleprompter. The line drew laughter, but the humor masked a deeper message. This was not simply a complaint about faulty equipment. It was a dismissal of multilateral diplomacy itself, a public assertion that the UN, in Trump's eyes, had failed both him and the world. His words echoed across the chamber as delegates shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure whether to chuckle at the jokes or absorb the gravity of his critique. For Trump, this was more than a speech. It was a performance reinforcing his long-standing narrative that international bodies are ineffective, wasteful, and unworthy of American reliance. Throughout his presidency, Trump has repeatedly cast himself as the deal-maker who succeeds where institutions falter. From the Korean Peninsula to the Middle East, he has insisted that only direct, personal negotiations can bring results. The United Nations, he implied, has been nothing more than an obstacle or, at best, irrelevant. But beyond the theatrics, the substance of his claims raises questions. Did Trump truly end 7 wars? Independent observers note that while he initiated troop withdrawals and brokered temporary ceasefires, most of those conflicts remain unsettled. In Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and beyond, US troops remain engaged, albeit in smaller numbers. Negotiations with the Taliban collapsed and reignited more than once. In Syria, ceasefires were partial and often temporary. Critics argue that Trump's definition of ending wars may be closer to rebranding or downsizing than achieving lasting peace. Still, the political impact of his framing is powerful. To his supporters, Trump appears as a tireless peacemaker who succeeded where others failed, only to be snubbed by an ungrateful international community. To his detractors, his remarks reveal a dangerous oversimplification of complex conflicts packaged into sound bites designed for applause. This duality has defined Trump's relationship with the UN since his earliest speeches at the Assembly. In 2017, he famously threatened to totally destroy North Korea. In subsequent appearances, he criticized globalist visions, chastised NATO allies for failing to spend more on defense, and repeatedly cast America as a nation standing apart from international constraints. His 2025 remarks followed the same trajectory, a dismissal of collective diplomacy in favor of unilateral action. The symbolism of mocking the UN on its own stage cannot be overstated. The organization created in 1945 to ensure peace and prevent world wars has long relied on the moral authority of its founding members. For the US president to belittle it before an audience of world leaders sends a message of retreat from multilateralism. For countries that depend on UN frameworks, whether for humanitarian aid, climate negotiations, or conflict mediation, the speech carried unsettling implications. Reactions inside the hall were mixed. Some delegates smiled politely at the jokes, choosing diplomacy over confrontation. Others sat stone-faced, concerned by the underlying tone. Analysts observing the scene noted that the laughter was thin, the applause muted. The weight of the critique hung heavier than the humor. Trump's quip about the escalator in particular may have sounded trivial, but for his audience at home, it served as a metaphor. In his telling, even when he enters the UN building, the machinery of the institution fails him. The teleprompter malfunction, another jab, underlined his message that the UN cannot be trusted to deliver even on the smallest stage. By weaving these technical mishaps into his broader critique, Trump transformed glitches into symbols of institutional incompetence. Yet, outside the chamber, many experts pushed back. They argued that the United Nations, though far from perfect, has played indispensable roles in peacekeeping operations across the world. From Mali to South Sudan, from Lebanon to Haiti, UN forces have provided stability in regions where few other powers were willing to engage. Humanitarian programs under its agencies have delivered food, shelter, and medical care to millions displaced by war. To dismiss all of this, critics warned, risks undermining decades of collective progress. The irony, they added, is that the UN has often stepped into conflicts precisely where the US chose not to intervene directly. While Trump boasted of ending wars, UN peacekeepers were often left managing fragile ceasefires and protecting civilians in conflict zones that received little American attention. But Trump's calculation was political as much as it was diplomatic. By positioning himself as a solitary peacemaker, he reinforced his domestic narrative of strength and independence. By ridiculing the UN, he tapped into the skepticism many Americans share about international institutions. His words may have unsettled diplomats abroad, but at home they resonated with a base increasingly wary of foreign entanglements. This strategy has proven effective for Trump before. In earlier speeches, his harsh words about NATO spurred allies to increase defense spending. His threats against North Korea, while criticized as reckless, did precede unprecedented face-to-face talks with Kim Jong-un. Whether coincidence or calculated pressure, Trump has shown a consistent belief that confrontation yields results. The question now is whether his ridicule of the United Nations will further erode America's standing within it. Already, some allies have questioned Washington's commitment to collective agreements, from climate accords to refugee compacts. Others fear that weakening the UN could embolden rival powers to fill the vacuum, reshaping international norms in ways less favorable to the West. As Trump left the podium, followed closely by First Lady Melania Trump, the symbolism remained striking. A US president mocking the world's premier diplomatic body in its own chamber sends a message that America's engagement is conditional, transactional, and deeply skeptical of multilateralism. For allies who rely on US leadership, the uncertainty lingers. Is the United States still a partner, or is it increasingly a power that acts alone? Outside the chamber, reactions poured in. Some diplomats privately expressed exasperation, noting that mocking the UN while enjoying its platform was contradictory. Others pointed out that the United Nations, despite its flaws, has endured precisely because of its ability to convene adversaries in the same room. Stripping it of legitimacy, they warned, could leave the world with fewer tools to manage crises. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters celebrated the speech as a moment of clarity. Social media posts hailed his candor, praising him for calling out the UN's inefficiencies. Commentators sympathetic to his vision argued that decades of funding had yielded little and that it was time for someone to speak bluntly about the institution's shortcomings. The divide highlights the enduring tension between nationalism and globalism, a theme that has defined Trump's presidency. To his critics, he is dismantling international order. To his supporters, he is reclaiming sovereignty. The United Nations, caught in the crossfire, becomes both the symbol and the scapegoat. As the General Assembly moved on to other speakers, the contrast became clear. Leaders from Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America stressed the importance of cooperation, collective responsibility, and shared frameworks for peace. Against this backdrop, Trump's words stood out as a lone voice, unapologetic in its rejection of multilateralism. Whether history judges his speech as a moment of truth or a gesture of mockery remains to be seen. What is certain is that Trump has once again used the UN stage not to endorse its mission, but to challenge its very relevance. For an institution built on consensus, such open disdain from the leader of its most powerful member state marks a profound challenge. In the end, Trump's address may be remembered less for the jokes about a faulty escalator and a broken teleprompter, and more for the message behind them, that in his vision of global politics, the United Nations is no longer a reliable partner in peace. Instead, it is an institution he portrays as malfunctioning, much like the machines he mocked on stage. And so the world watches, caught between applause and silence, as one of its founding architects turns the spotlight back on the cracks in the system.
There's never been anything like that. I'm very honored to have done it. It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much.